"Excuse me, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you not to touch that dress." The tone was sharp, but professional. Polite on the surface, but condescending just beneath it. The kind of voice that came with years of rehearsed superiority. "That piece is worth $11,500. It's not for casual handling." The sales associate's eyes didn't meet Danielle's. They dropped to her shoes, modest black flats, then rose to her coat, simple, beige, unbranded. Her tone softened, but only to twist the knife. "We typically reserve this collection for clients who've booked private fittings. Perhaps I can direct you to something more accessible." Danielle didn't say a word. She didn't flinch, didn't pull her hand back. Her fingers had barely brushed the hem of the gown, a soft sweep of champagne silk, handcrafted by an Italian designer she personally knew. But none of that mattered to the woman standing in front of her, because Danielle wasn't dressed the part. And in this world, looking like you don't belong is all it takes to be treated like you don't. Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if this kind of story fires you up and reminds you that respect should never come with a price tag, hit subscribe, tap like, and let's keep it going. All right, let's begin. It was a quiet Friday afternoon in London's Mayfair district, where silence is luxury and eye contact is a privilege you earn. The Match's fashion flagship had only been open for 3 weeks, tucked behind frosted windows and guarded doors. It catered to a certain type of shopper, one who knew how to walk in like they owned the place. Or better yet, actually did. Danielle Brooks didn't walk in that way. Not this time. She wore no jewelry, no designer handbag, no high heels clicking across the marble floor. Just a trench coat, dark jeans, and the kind of quiet confidence that turns heads when people bother to look. But here, no one looked. Not at her. She passed through the double doors without fanfare. The front desk associate barely lifted her head. No greeting, no offer of assistance. Just a glance, quick and dismissive, before returning to her screen. Danielle walked slowly past curated racks of gowns and handbags, past displays where perfumes were lit like rare diamonds, past a middle-aged white man in a Tom Ford blazer who was already being offered champagne before he said a word. A young black woman, maybe in her 50s, was standing quietly by the scarves, holding a clutch. No one approached her. Danielle moved deeper into the store, stopping near the central pedestal where the Lorenzo Ferretti gown stood beneath warm lighting. She knew this piece well. It had taken 8 weeks to finish. Hand-stitched beading, custom satin imported from Florence. She had approved the purchase order herself. And now she stood in front of it like any customer, not as the woman who helped fund the opening of this very store. She reached out gently, letting her fingers barely graze the hem. That's when the sales associate appeared. Blonde, well-dressed, confident in that Mayfair way. The confidence of someone who never expects to be challenged, and certainly not by someone who looks like Danielle did that day. She didn't ask if Danielle needed help. She didn't introduce herself. She led with control and insult. Danielle let the silence sit. She looked at the dress again, then at the associate, who was now standing with her arms folded, waiting for a reaction. She got none. Just the stillness of a woman who had been in this position too many times and was far past the point of being shocked. This wasn't new. This was just disappointing. But Danielle wasn't here to be angry. She was here to listen, to watch, and to remember every face in the room, what no one knew. Not the saleswoman, not the front desk, not the manager sipping espresso in the back office. Was that Danielle Brooks was not just some walk-in customer? She was the silent investor behind Match's Fashion Mayfair, a co-owner, a strategist, a woman who'd built her name not on fashion, but on transformation, turning overlooked spaces into powerhouses, And today, she'd come in plain clothes and quiet steps to see exactly what kind of culture she had inherited. And what she found was worse than she expected. Danielle didn't move. Her hand hovered gently over the satin hem of the $1,500 gown as the sales associate stood stiffly beside her, watching like a hawk, as if the mere presence of Danielle's fingertips might soil the fabric. There was a quiet kind of humiliation in that moment, not loud, not public, but sharp and undeniable. Danielle let out the smallest breath, not out of anger, but out of restraint. She glanced at the tag hanging from the side of the dress and knew exactly what it was. Lorenzo Ferretti, champagne silk, hand-beaded neckline, structured corset. She'd seen this exact piece in Milan months ago, long before it ever hit the floor here. But now, to this woman, to this store, she was someone who needed to be told to back away from it, not because of what she touched, but because of who she was assumed to be. "Is there anything in particular you're looking for?" the associate asked next, her voice tight, eyes carefully avoiding Danielle's. "We do have a few more affordable options toward the back." The words "more affordable" rang in the air like a coded message. Danielle turned to face her directly, offering only a polite smile and a soft, "Just browsing." That smile, though, it didn't reach her eyes. She stepped back from the gown, not because she was told to, but because she'd seen enough. She moved slowly toward the next rack, catching a glimpse of her own reflection in the gold-edged mirror. Trench coat, dark jeans, no visible labels. In a space like this, that meant invisible. The sales associate didn't follow. She returned to her perch by the counter, whispering something to a younger employee in a crisp gray skirt who looked over at Danielle and quietly laughed. Danielle noticed. She noticed everything. And as she walked through the rows of luxury fashion, she watched how other customers were treated. One woman, blonde, probably in her 40s, walked in and was immediately greeted by two associates, one of whom offered her a sparkling drink. Another woman, Asian and elegantly dressed, was nodded at, but not approached. Then there was a young black woman, maybe mid-20s, who lingered near the handbags for several minutes and was completely ignored. Patterns, subtle, but loud if you knew how to listen. Danielle made her way toward the rear of the store, where a roped-off area marked private styling was guarded by a tall security officer in a perfectly pressed black suit. As she neared, his hand casually rose to stop her. "That section's for appointments only," he said. His voice wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, automatic. "Private clients only. Do you have a name on the list?" Danielle tilted her head slightly. "No," she replied, calmly. "Just wanted to take a look." The guard nodded, unmoved. "Can't let you pass the velvet. I'm afraid." And just like that, a piece of rope became a wall. She turned without argument, stepped aside, and quietly studied the space from a distance. All the plush armchairs, mirrored fitting rooms, soft piano music overhead. She could have forced her way in, dropped a name, pulled out a card, but that wasn't why she was here. She didn't come to be recognized. She came to be unseen, and to see how they'd treat someone who didn't fit the image of what they considered valuable. And today, they were showing her, clearly. As she turned back toward the main floor, Danielle caught a flicker of someone else moving through the store, a woman she hadn't noticed before, dark-skinned, about her age, dressed in a pale blue wrap dress with sensible pumps. She had a small purse tucked under one arm and a hopeful look on her face. Danielle slowed her steps and watched from across the aisle as the woman approached the front counter. "Hi," the woman said softly. "I saw online you had the Jacquemus blazer in stock. I just flew in from Birmingham. And..." She didn't finish the sentence before the receptionist cut her off. "We're not holding items unless you're a style client," she said curtly. "Do you have a profile with us?" The woman looked confused. "I mean, I made an account online, Then you'll need to wait," the receptionist snapped. Already turning away, Danielle's jaw tightened. The woman glanced around, embarrassed, shrinking into herself as other customers passed by without notice. Danielle had seen enough, and yet she let herself watch just a little longer, long enough to feel the sting of familiarity, because years ago, long before she ever sat at boardroom tables or signed multi-million-dollar deals, Danielle Brooks had been that woman, the one standing awkwardly near the register, the one people walked past, the one saleswomen looked through like glass. She'd been in college when it first happened. Wandered into a boutique in Atlanta just trying to find a dress for her cousin's wedding. She remembered saving up for weeks, remembered how the store clerk looked at her, asked if she was lost, and told her, with a tight smile, "We don't really carry sizes past a 6. Sweetheart." She remembered leaving empty-handed. She remembered crying in the car. And she remembered the vow she made to herself that night. "One day, I'm going to build a world where women like me don't have to prove they belong." And now here she was, standing in the very world she helped build, only to realize the rot still lived inside it. The branding had changed. The floors were shinier, the lighting warmer, but the judgment? Still the same. Danielle moved toward the far end of the store, where a small lounge sat unoccupied. She sank into one of the chairs, folded her hands in her lap, and took one long, quiet breath. She wasn't upset. She was clear. Because what she saw today, the whispers, the stares, the velvet rope, was exactly what she came for, and what they didn't realize. Not Chloe, the manager, not the young woman with the smirk, not even the guard at the rope. Was that this silent customer, sitting in their store with nothing but a soft trench coat and quiet eyes? Was the storm they didn't see coming, and she had just started counting the minutes. Danielle took slow steps away from the gown display, her fingertips still tingling from the tension she'd just endured. She didn't flinch or show any signs of frustration. Not outwardly, anyway. But inside, something had shifted. She could feel it. A familiar heat rising beneath her ribs. The kind that wasn't anger, not exactly. It was deeper than that. It was memory, experience. A lifetime of coded stares and cold silences. And as she moved through the store, it became clearer by the second that this place, this polished, expensive, boutique London showroom, wasn't designed for women like her. Not unless they were draped in obvious wealth. Not unless their wallets entered the room first. She watched it unfold in real time. A young white woman stepped in moments after Danielle had been scolded for touching the dress. She wore a cream designer coat and patent leather heels. Her hair was blown out and her nails were manicured in soft pink. Within seconds, 2 staff members had descended on her like moths to a flame, offering a drink, asking if she'd like to see the new arrivals, ushering her gently toward the private suite upstairs. Danielle watched, not with jealousy, but with perfect clarity. This wasn't just customer service. It was status theater. It was the unspoken rule book. And Danielle knew it by heart. She'd read it, lived it, rewritten it. And now she was watching it play out in a store she co-owned. A store that was, in many ways, supposed to be the future. Instead, it looked just like the past. That's when it hit her. How easily old habits survive under new logos. The lighting was different. The branding, more inclusive. But the undercurrent, it hadn't changed. Not one bit. Her heels made no sound as she walked deeper into the space. She passed a woman who stood awkwardly by the shoe wall. A woman with dark brown skin and kind eyes, wearing a simple blue cardigan. The woman waited and waited until finally she turned around and walked out. No one had spoken to her. No one had even said hello. Danielle caught her eye just as the door closed behind her. That used to be her, the invisible one. She knew that walk, the quiet retreat, the moment when hope hardens into shame. Danielle blinked, and for a second, she wasn't in London anymore. She was 19 again, standing outside a boutique on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, sweaty from the summer heat, her best dress clinging to her back. She'd saved for 2 months to buy a gown for a cousin's wedding, the first formal event she'd ever been invited to. She remembered stepping into that shop with a hopeful heart, only to be told by the clerk, without even a glance, "We don't carry your size." Danielle had been a size 10 back then. A 10. She left without saying a word, sat in her car in a grocery store parking lot, and cried into her steering wheel. That was the moment. Right there. That was the beginning of everything. The beginning of her vow. She promised herself, then and there, that if she ever had the power, she would create spaces where no woman, no matter her size, her skin, her shoes, would ever be made to feel small again. Now here she was, 2 decades later, in a store she helped fund, watching that same pain get recycled through expensive smiles and tight British tones. Her face was calm, but her spine straightened. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. She wasn't here by accident. She'd planned this visit deliberately, had flown in under the radar, with no entourage, no announcement, no designer handbag. She'd worn something clean but unbranded, knowing exactly how it would be received. She needed to see it for herself, needed to know if the culture she was building had cracks beneath the polish. And now, there was no doubt, the cracks weren't just there, they were deep, and they were widening. Danielle made her way toward the back of the store, where the velvet rope marked the entrance to the private styling suites. A security guard, young, tall, expressionless, stepped in front of her as if on cue. "Appointments only," he said, not rudely, but firmly. Danielle nodded. "I understand. Just curious." He didn't move. "Sorry, ma'am." No eye contact, no flexibility, just protocol. She turned without protest and took a seat on the edge of a low bench near the window. From there, she watched everything, the choreography of privilege, the women who were ushered in with flattery, the men who were greeted by name, the older couple who were gently steered toward the affordable luxury section, code for less attention, lower price tags, the way the staff smiled only when necessary, the way their eyes flicked over people like scanners, calculating worth before deciding whether to engage. Danielle watched all of it, and behind her stillness, the wheels were turning. She glanced down at her phone, checking the time. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since she walked in. Not a single employee had asked her name. Not one had offered her a fitting room or a glass of water. She wasn't angry. She was resolute. Because this wasn't about rudeness. It was about values. About whether the vision she'd poured herself into was being upheld or betrayed. And now, she had her answer. She stood up, slow and quiet, adjusted her coat, and began walking. Not toward the exit, but toward the center of the floor, toward the moment they would all remember, because the days of quiet observation were over, and the reckoning was about to begin. Danielle stood near the center of the store, calm and composed, but no longer silent. The same woman they had dismissed just moments ago now held the room without effort, not through status symbols or loud declarations, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly who she was. One by one, the staff began to notice her stillness. Their eyes shifted. The energy changed. Chloe, the store manager, appeared from the back with a clipboard in hand and the usual air of control, until she locked eyes with Danielle and registered something was off. Her smile flickered, unsure. "Can I help you with something?" she asked in a voice that tried to sound warm, but couldn't hide its edge of irritation. Danielle didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a slim black card holder, and carefully slid out a matte navy business card. She held it between two fingers, face outward. Chloe stepped forward, took the card with a slight smirk, and then read the name. Her expression changed in an instant. Danielle Brooks, co-founder, Oriel Lux Holdings. Chloe blinked. Her eyes darted back to Danielle's face. Then she took a full step back, her fingers suddenly trembling as she handed the card back like it was burning her skin. I wasn't aware," she started to say, but Danielle gently cut her off with a raised hand, not to silence her, but to stop the performance before it began. "You didn't need to be aware," Danielle said quietly. "That was the point." Her voice was steady, measured, not angry, but unshakably firm. "I came in without an assistant, without designer heels, without a press badge or a stylist in tow. I came in the way most women walk into stores like this, just hoping to be treated with decency." She glanced around the room now, her eyes scanning the staff members, several of whom were pretending to straighten racks while listening in. "And in the 45 minutes I've been here, I've watched you choose who gets dignity, who gets silence, and who gets pushed aside." Chloe swallowed hard. "Ms. Brooks, I can assure you." Danielle held up a single finger. "Please, let me finish." She took a step toward the Ferretti gown, the one she had been told not to touch, the one that now shimmered like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. "I know this dress. I approved the production invoice in Milan myself. I know who stitched it, what the lining's made of, how many hours it took to complete. I also know that I was told not to lay a finger on it, because in your eyes, I didn't look the part." Her voice never rose, but the weight in it filled the space. Customers nearby had grown silent, pretending to browse but clearly listening. A couple at the perfume counter exchanged glances. Even the front desk receptionist had stopped typing. "This isn't about me," Danielle continued. "This is about the culture you've built here, or the one you've allowed to fester. A culture where black women are second-guessed, where women of color are overlooked, where someone's shoes matter more than their story." Her words landed slowly, one after the next, like footsteps on marble. "I didn't walk into this store to be recognized. I walked in to see who you are when you think no one important is watching." She turned her eyes back to Chloe. "Now I know." Richard Cole, the regional director who had been quietly notified by Danielle's executive team earlier, walked through the door right then, a tall, distinguished man in a navy suit. He moved with purpose and something close to dread. He knew Danielle, had worked with her for over a decade. He knew that calm voice meant serious consequences were coming. "Ms. Brooks," he said as he approached, tone respectful. "I came as soon as Danielle turned to him, her tone unwavering. "Good. You'll want to hear this." Chloe was visibly sweating now. The staff had gathered in small clusters, uncertain whether to step in or step away. The sales associate who had told Danielle not to touch the dress now stood frozen behind a pillar, her arms crossed tightly, face pale. Danielle walked toward the middle of the floor and addressed them all. "I don't need an apology. I don't need explanations. I need change, real change. Today," she gestured to Richard, "effective immediately. I want the entire service team at this location suspended pending review. That includes management." Chloe opened her mouth in protest, but Richard cut her off. "You heard her," he said, firm and final. Danielle wasn't finished. This store doesn't need a new paint color or another branded bag in the window. It needs a soul, a real one that knows how to treat people, all people, with respect, no matter what they wear, where they're from, or how quietly they walk in. She paused, letting that settle. And from this point forward, Matches Fashion Mayfair will operate under a new directive. Respect is not optional, not here, not ever again. There was silence, deep, full, stunned. No one moved. The music overhead felt ridiculous now, soft jazz playing while the room trembled with reckoning. Danielle stood in the middle of it all, still poised, still elegant in her simplicity. No flash, no spectacle, just truth, just presence. And as she turned, slowly heading for the exit, she stopped beside the same display that had sparked it all, the 11,500 gown. She looked at it one more time, then at the stunned staff, and said with a quiet finality, "If a woman can't touch a dress without being judged, then maybe it's not worth wearing." And with that, she walked toward the door, not storming, not retreating, just walking like a woman who had come for answers, and left with clarity. What they thought was a quiet customer had turned out to be the voice they never saw coming. And she had spoken. Danielle didn't walk out. Not yet. She stood firmly in the center of the floor as the room sank into stunned silence. Every staff member either frozen in place or slowly gathering near, uncertain whether to speak or stay still. The boutique, once filled with delicate music and forced smiles, had turned into a stage, and Danielle Brooks was now holding court, not with rage, not with theatrics, but with the quiet control of someone who had been ignored one too many times, and who now refused to be overlooked. Richard Cole stood just behind her, arms folded, saying nothing. His presence alone was confirmation, to the staff, to the onlookers, and to Chloe, that this was no bluff. Danielle began to pace slowly, her heels brushing softly across the polished floor. She turned to face Chloe first. "Let's begin with you," she said, her voice even. "You're the manager of this location. That means you set the tone, whether you realize it or not." Chloe swallowed. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Danielle continued. "I walked in this afternoon and was ignored. That's not a customer service failure. That's a leadership failure. I watched your staff welcome one woman with champagne, while two others, women of color, stood in silence, waiting for attention that never came. You saw it. You let it happen. And that makes you accountable." Chloe's eyes dropped to the floor, her hands clutched tightly at her sides. "Next." Danielle turned to the sales associate who had so confidently told her not to touch the dress. The woman, Brittany, straightened, clearly trying to maintain some image of professionalism, but her cheeks were flushed. "You made an assumption about me," Danielle said. "One based entirely on what I wore. You decided I didn't belong near something expensive. You told me, without even knowing my name, that I couldn't afford to be here." Brittany opened her mouth, a whisper of protest, something about procedure. But Danielle raised one hand. "Let me be very clear. You don't get to speak to women that way. Not here, not ever again." Danielle's tone never changed. It remained composed, even elegant, but her words hit like thunder. "This entire store runs on one illusion. The illusion that kindness is reserved for those who look the part. That luxury must come with judgment. That your job is to separate the worthy from the rest. But let me tell you something. Luxury is not about exclusion. It's about experience. And experience begins with respect." She turned slightly, addressing the entire staff now. "Each of you was watched today. Every choice, who you helped, who you ignored, who you whispered about. It was all seen, not just by me, but by the people who walked through that door hoping for a little grace. Some of them won't come back, but you'll remember this." Her eyes landed on Ava, the youngest of the staff, who had laughed earlier when Brittany made her snide comment. "And you," Danielle said gently, "you followed a bad example. That tells me two things. One, you're still learning, and two, you're teachable. So you're the only one here who might have a second chance. Don't waste it." She paused, letting the moment breathe. You could hear nothing but the quiet clink of a spoon at the cafe counter behind the perfume section, where a couple sat silently watching. The entire store, once aloof and elegant, now stood suspended in reality, raw, exposed, and very, very human. Danielle turned to Richard. "I want suspensions issued immediately," she said. "Brittany, Chloe, Marcus at the door. All three are done here. Pending final review. Their behavior doesn't represent this brand or my name. And effective immediately. I want an internal audit of every boutique under this partnership. If it's happening here, it's happening elsewhere." Richard nodded without hesitation. "Understood." The staff now looked more like statues than employees. Faces pale, arms folded across chests, eyes darting without direction. Danielle turned back once more, not to gloat, but to anchor the message, to make it permanent. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said softly. "I came here to see whether this business still lives up to the vision I helped fund. I've spent my life building spaces where women, especially women who look like me, can feel seen, valued, safe. I didn't come here for couture. I came for the truth. And now that I have it, we rebuild from here." Then she walked toward the far side of the boutique, toward the young woman at the front desk, Erin, the only staff member who had offered her a polite glance when she arrived. Danielle stopped and looked her in the eyes. "You were quiet," she said, "but you didn't sneer. You didn't smirk. You acknowledged me. That may not sound like much, but in a room full of closed doors, you cracked one open. I want your name added to the internal review, not for discipline, for consideration." Erin looked stunned. "Consideration for what?" Danielle smiled gently. "Leadership training." Then, without another word, she turned, walked back across the marble floor, and headed for the main doors. She passed the Ferretti gown one last time, the silk glinting under warm light. No longer a symbol of status, but a symbol of how quickly perception can twist into prejudice. Danielle didn't look back. She didn't need to. The message had landed, and as she stepped through the glass doors into the soft afternoon light of Mayfair, she felt no triumph, only clarity. Sometimes, a quiet woman in flats can cause more change than a boardroom full of executives. All it takes is refusing to stay silent when silence is the problem. As Danielle stepped out onto the polished stone just beyond the boutique's doors, she paused for only a breath, then turned back toward the store without hesitation. This wasn't finished. Not yet. Inside. The team stood in stunned clusters, their polished composure fraying at the edges. Richard followed close behind her, his phone already in hand, dialing corporate legal and HR contacts like clockwork. Danielle re-entered the space, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with the heavy, unmistakable stillness of a woman carrying both decision and direction. "Let's make this official," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz that still floated absurdly above them. "Chloe Whitmore, you are relieved of your position as store manager, effective immediately." Chloe's face fell, her lips parted as if to speak, but Danielle kept going, not missing a beat. "Your leadership created an environment where disrespect became policy. You fostered exclusion under the guise of exclusivity, and that ends today." She turned next to Brittany, who still stood behind a glass counter, rigid and pale. "Brittany Collins, your conduct this afternoon, particularly your words to me and the women I watched you ignore, were discriminatory, unprofessional, and deeply harmful to this brand. You're being placed on indefinite suspension, pending final review from headquarters." Brittany's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her earlier smirk had long since vanished. Danielle turned next toward the security guard, Marcus, who had blocked her path earlier with an air of practiced authority. "Marcus Fielding," she said, "your role is to protect the space, not to filter people based on what you think they look like. You reinforced a culture of exclusion with silence and obedience. You are also suspended pending investigation." The room was dead quiet, and yet emotionally charged in every direction. Some stunned, some relieved, and a few suddenly hopeful. Danielle looked to Richard, who was already typing into his tablet. "Formal notices go out within the hour," she said. "I want system access revoked, internal communications cut, and the security footage from today preserved. We'll need it for training and accountability." Richard nodded, his eyes focused. Efficient. He understood her cadence. Danielle didn't move in chaos. She moved in justice, and justice, in her hands, came swiftly and with unmistakable precision. She turned then to the rest of the staff. Aaron, Ava, 2 part-timers, and the older backroom assistant who had quietly stepped forward. Danielle's eyes settled on Ava, the youngest of the team, who looked more afraid than defensive. "Ava Monroe," she said, softer now. "You followed poor leadership, and you laughed when you should have listened. But I believe you're still learning. I'm not firing you today, but you will enter retraining, from scratch. And you will write a full statement about what you saw and why it mattered. By end of day." Ava blinked, nodding rapidly, stunned that she hadn't been dismissed on the spot. Then Danielle looked to Aaron, the only one who had shown her a glimmer of decency upon entering. "You'll step into interim coordination," Danielle said. "You'll report directly to Richard for the next 4 weeks. I want this store reopened under new procedures, new tone, new culture." Aaron's eyes widened. "Me? I'm not even full-time yet." Danielle gave a faint smile. "Exactly. You haven't been here long enough to be ruined by bad systems. That's why I'm giving you the chance to help reset it." Around them, the boutique no longer felt intimidating. It felt raw, like a place under renovation, not physically, but spiritually. The silence in the room had changed. It wasn't stunned anymore. It was awakening. Danielle motioned to one of her executive assistants, who had just entered with a folder and tablet in hand. She quickly signed off on the restructuring orders, then turned to the large display wall near the center of the boutique. "I want this removed," she said. "The photos, the branding images, they're beautiful, but they're empty. We'll replace it with something real. I want portraits of real women, customers of all backgrounds, all sizes, all shades, wearing our designs, not posed, not photoshopped, just real. Let this wall reflect who we serve, not who we try to impress." The assistant nodded and began snapping photos of the space for redesign proposals. Danielle moved to the fitting rooms next. She opened one of the mirrored doors and stepped inside, standing in the space where, just an hour earlier, she'd been told she didn't belong. She stood in silence for a beat, absorbing everything: the soft light, the clean marble counter, the expensive hooks. Then she turned back out and faced her team. "From this moment forward," she said, "no woman is to be judged the second she steps through these doors, not by her shoes, not by her hair, not by her accent or how much she chooses to share. You will meet her with respect, every single time. If you can't do that, this is not the place for you." Outside the store, A few passers-by paused at the tall glass windows. Sensing something was happening inside, they didn't know the details, but they could see the faces, some hopeful, some devastated, some finally seen. Danielle moved back toward the entrance. She looked around one final time. The Ferretti gown still shimmered under the spotlight. But it no longer defined the room. It no longer held power. Not because its price had changed, but because its meaning had. "We can still be luxury," Danielle said, now speaking to no one in particular. "But not at the cost of human dignity. That kind of luxury isn't worth wearing." She didn't storm out. She didn't look over her shoulder. She simply walked through the doorway with the same grace she'd entered with. But this time, the weight was no longer hers to carry. It belonged to the ones who stayed behind, to the ones who now had to rebuild, not just the floor layout or the policies, but themselves. The kind of change Danielle brought didn't come with applause. It came with mirrors, the kind that didn't show your outfit, but your character. And in that Mayfair store, those mirrors had just been cleaned. 1 week later, the boutique at Matches Fashion Mayfair reopened, but it didn't feel like the same store. Gone were the tense smiles and whispered judgments, the invisible hierarchies and velvet ropes that silently told certain people they weren't welcome. The marble floors still shone. The lighting still bathed the gowns in warm gold. But something far more important had shifted. The culture. Erin, now leading the floor in her new interim role, stood proudly behind the welcome desk, greeting customers not by appearance or assumption, but with genuine warmth. The display wall that once featured flawless, retouched models had been replaced overnight with real photographs of real women, teachers, artists, grandmothers, nurses, mothers, businesswomen, all wearing L'Oreal Luxe pieces in everyday moments. Each frame captured not perfection, but presence, not branding, but being. Under each photo was a name and a single word: worthy. Danielle had insisted on it. No price tag, no label, just one truth. Word had spread quickly about what happened, quietly at first. Whispers between stylists and corporate calls. But within days, it reached other locations, and then other brands. Headlines never made it to the tabloids. Danielle didn't want drama. She wanted reform. But within industry circles, everyone knew. A powerful black woman had walked into her own store, been judged by her flats instead of her name, and calmly, systematically, flipped the entire culture on its head, inside the London office of L'Oreal Luxe. Danielle sat in a quiet conference room, reviewing training modules now being developed based on the Mayfair incident. Her eyes moved over each policy line with quiet intensity. "This isn't about punishment," she said to her executive team. "It's about memory. If people can remember the pain they caused or ignored, they're less likely to repeat it, and if they can't feel it, they're not ready to lead." She signed off on the materials and leaned back, her eyes briefly drifting to the city skyline outside. From that high up, London looked peaceful, polite, even. But she knew better. Respect wasn't built by distance. It was built by presence. And she had been present. Later that afternoon, Danielle returned to the Mayfair boutique, not in disguise, not in silence, but as herself. She wore a deep navy dress from her own collection, low heels, and her mother's gold earrings. Simple, elegant, meaningful. She didn't need the staff to bow. She needed them to remember. As she stepped inside, Erin greeted her not with surprise or nerves, but with a genuine, proud smile. "Welcome back, Miss Brooks," she said. "We've been expecting you." Danielle returned the smile and walked the showroom slowly, stopping at displays, noticing how staff now offered kind nods to every customer who entered. A woman in scrubs on her lunch break, a teen with her grandmother, a middle-aged black woman holding her coat tightly around her as she browsed. No one was invisible anymore. And that, Danielle thought, was the real currency of change. Toward the back of the store, she saw a familiar face. It was the woman from the week before, the one who had flown in from Birmingham, only to be dismissed at the counter, this time. She was seated in the private styling suite, laughing with a stylist, sipping tea as two associates showed her different pieces. She saw Danielle, paused, and mouthed, "Thank you." Danielle nodded gently and kept walking. She didn't need applause. She needed follow-through before leaving. She met with the remaining team, including Ava, who had just completed her first week of training. Danielle asked her a simple question. "What did you learn?" Ava stood quietly for a moment, then said, "I learned that fashion means nothing if it's used to make people feel less than, and I learned that dignity doesn't wear labels." Danielle looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Don't forget it," as she stepped out of the boutique for the last time that week. The London sky had softened into that pale blue haze that always arrived before dusk. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, her heels clicking gently, blending into the crowd like anyone else, and yet carrying something few others did. Not just power, not just presence, but proof. Proof that you don't need to shout to be heard. Proof that you don't need to fire every bullet to end a war. Sometimes, you just have to walk in, quietly, and let the system collapse under the weight of its own reflection. Danielle had done just that, with grace, with purpose, and without ever needing to announce who she was, until the moment it mattered most, behind her, inside the boutique. The new training began, not just for staff, but for how the brand would move forward. No more assumptions. No more selective hospitality. No more scanning someone's shoes to decide their worth. That era had ended the moment Danielle's fingers touched the hem of a dress they thought she couldn't afford. And as the screen fades to black, a single message remains. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Respect is not exclusive, it's expected. And now, the world knows what real luxury looks like. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it. Let's keep dignity louder than judgment.